All right, we are recording this session. I'm super excited to have with me JV Crum the III today. JV, how are you?
Great. How are you today?
Living the dream every day, every
Well,
day.
you're in Boulder, Colorado, and that's the dream city. It's the
It
kingdom.
is, it is, yes. And you're in Denver, right?
I am in Denver. I love Denver, but I've lived in Boulder as well. So both worlds are fantastic. And I just want to say hello to everybody who's listening in. This is a great opportunity. We're going to be talking about podcasting, and I hope that you're going to learn a lot today.
All right, excellent. Let's get this interview started. JV, I'm going to quickly introduce yourself. You have become you're a self-made entrepreneur, millionaire. You've become a millionaire in your 20s. You're a best-selling author, keynote speaker, certified business coach, licensed attorney, serial entrepreneur. You're a writer for the Huffington Post. And so on. That's a very impressive resume. Do you want to quickly add something? Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I think from the beginning, what's really interesting is that it took me till I was 41 before I identified as an entrepreneur, and I had built and sold, seven-figure companies, and actually been playing entrepreneur games since I was 4, selling tangerine juice and egg cartons out of my pup tent for 10 cents to the high school. But I never caught on, had, all these little businesses that I did as a kid, mowing lawns, all that kind of thing. But I never, and built companies and never caught on that I was an entrepreneur because I kept thinking, well, I've got the license in law, I should go practice law. And then I finally realized this is why I'm on the planet. And now I work specifically only with entrepreneurs who specifically want to get to that first million. And they want to do it by making a big positive impact. And that's what Conscious Millionaire is all about. Let's change the world through how we're entrepreneurs and how we make our money.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so you're the author of Conscious Millionaire. Just real briefly, tell me about the book.
Well, the book was a pretty long journey. It's 320 pages, 14 chapters. And, what I think one of the more interesting things, if you're writing a book, is the title, because the subtitle is Grow Your Business by Making a Difference. And I got that subtitle by going to my particular marketplace, and about 30 out of 40 people who answered the survey questions, which I sent out 2 sets of surveys, were actually friends. So I knew that they were my target market. And I gave them options, and that was the combination that came together. And, Chris, when I go to events, I always take usually a case of books with me, and I give them away, sign at the events, and people will stare at the cover and the subtitle, and they'll go, that's what I want. So that's the power of the book. Was already written, but what was the right title other than Conscious Millionaire? I let my marketplace tell me, and the marketplaces loved it. When we launched, it became the #1 book on all of Amazon. We had 50,000 downloads in just over 3 days. So that tells you that the title that my audience, my market chose was the right title.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we're talking about podcasting today, and I really appreciate you making the time to share.
And I appreciate we've done a recording that's coming out of you on my podcast, and I really appreciate you being on the podcast. I love to podcast. It's podcasting and coaching are my 2 favorite things to do in business, and my third is travel. And a couple of years ago, I traveled for almost 6 months, podcasted, coached, traveled, lived in different places, leased furnished condos, and I wanted to prove that you could do that. And now what I'm planning is, how do I do that for 4 to 6 weeks out of every year, go live in another country, and I can still run my business because it can all be done virtually. And that's the beauty of podcasting. You can do it from anywhere. As long as you've got good internet, you're good to go.
Well, I hope we have our listeners' attention now. What about podcasting? It's a little bit old school, right? Is that boom over, or can somebody still get on the
No, I think we're still in the rising part. I think, the majority of Americans are still on their way to making podcasting part of their daily life. And if you look at all the news shows, Every one of them, it seems, is starting their own podcast. The hosts of the news shows now have their own podcast. Everybody's jumping into podcasts. So I think that podcasting is one of the big waves that's continuing into the future, and that it's still, we're not even close to a crest. We're still on an uprise. And, when I think about what I've done, I got in about 4.5 years ago. I now have 6 podcasts that are a network of syndicated radio shows as well. And we have 1,800 episodes and 12 million listeners. But that started with 0. And nobody knew who I was because I had built and sold companies in the private sector. I wasn't a public person. I wasn't online. Nobody had ever heard of me. And one of the great things is that podcasting, if you do it right, put it together correctly, market it correctly, really makes you a rock star in your particular niche, because it's the number one reason that people know who I am and have heard of me. And when I go to conference, people come up to me and they want to get the book, they want to talk to me, they want to do a photo. That came out of podcasting.
Wow. So this actually leads me into my second question. So what do you think makes your podcast, I mean, you run one of the most successful podcasts on the planet. What makes you stand out?
I think one of the reasons it's so successful is that we've built it on systems. And there's so many systems that we have, including how we get our guests like you, how we onboard the guest, how we remind the guest. But then when we come to the show, we use a very traditional radio clock. And if you haven't heard of that term, what it means, all radio shows have it, by the way. And they're sitting there with this clock that's literally oftentimes 60 minutes. In our case, it's 30 minutes. And it has what is going to happen at each minute. And they're in segments. And then within those segments, I know what has to happen. So my full radio clock includes 4 pages of prompts as to where I need to be at each moment in this podcast. And we've provided that to the guest in advance as soon as they sign up. So they've had an opportunity to look at it. They know the questions we're going to ask in the second part, what we want from them, how it's going to run. So they have that in their head as well. But it's all very organized. And that's what makes for a great podcast. We have lots of segments. It's entertaining. It's designed to get great information, and it's very specific. We're working with entrepreneurs such as business owners, service professionals, business coaches. Those are our 3 major groups. And they all want to get to their first million. So all of our shows are different angles on marketing or examples of people who've gotten to their first million. How did they do it? Business coaches, experts in the area of business. We even bring in experts like Olympic athletes who've won medals because we want people to be high performers. So everything is very specifically, driven to help anyone listening who's an entrepreneur get to their first million. So we identified the problem and we're going to help you get the solution. And that's why I think they're so successful. And then, I have to thank you. I have really amazing guests. I'm very, very fortunate that my guests show up and they're incredible people with vast knowledge in their area, and we can have an amazing conversation.
And I have to say, I do a lot of interviews. Your interview, the entire setup was the best structured I ever came across. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
That. Okay, the 3 tips you would give somebody to be successful with podcasting.
Well, it really begins with knowing why you're doing the podcast, because so many people start a podcast, but they don't have a specific direction. It's not even connected to their business. So assuming that you've got a clear business model, you know who your target market is, you know what their top problem is, and you know what your solution is for it, then these are the 3 questions that you need to ask yourself. And they're big questions, but they're going to give direction to every bit of your podcast, how you design it, what guests you want to have, how you're angling it for the problem that you're solving. And the first one is what I call the why of impact. So you have to decide, what is that specific impact? In our case, we want to help people get to their first million who are entrepreneurs. And why Are you choosing that impact? Because here's the crazy thing for all of us who are entrepreneurs. You're listening today and you're going to know, yes, I get crazy about this too, is that we all have so many talents and so many ideas and so many things we'd like to accomplish. And here's the problem. We can't. The only way you can be successful as an entrepreneur is to get laser focused on one direction. Well, guess what? The same thing is true for your podcast. So in our case, well, why am I focused on that? Because I want to do something nobody has ever done on the planet or even come close. I think, the most number of millionaires somebody's made is maybe 100 and something. I want by November 1st, 2045, I'll be 90 years old, just so you know. And I want to have helped 1 million entrepreneurs become conscious millionaires. Nobody's done anything like that. There are going to be all kinds of technological advances like AI that we can use to help do that. But that's why I want to do it, because I know what a change that'll make in their lives. And because I help people make their money consciously by making a difference, I know that that's going to make a massive difference in society. Then the second question is something most people never ask. What money do you want to make out of this podcast? It's not a hobby. I think of podcasts as a growth engine, and it should be part of your business and really at the core of your business of what you're doing. So what do you want to make in terms of money, and why do you want to make that? So then that's going to influence how you design it, so that is it going to come from sponsorships? Is it going to come from people buying from you? Is it going to come from where's the biggest place, the guests, which is the biggest place that you can make money? And then the third one is, what do you want out of it? Let me give you an example. Do you want to become known as the number one expert in doing X? Do you want to up your game in terms of who you are as an influencer, so that maybe you started out at a C and now you're a B player, or you're a B player and now you want to be in the celebrity game? And one of the reasons you want to do that isn't just the notoriety so that people know more about you, but that so you can connect with that level of peers who become your friends, who become your business associates in doing joint ventures and doing affiliate programs. And then what do you want out of it in terms of for yourself? Is this going to actually give you an easier avenue to build your business, that you don't have to be doing podcast interviews all week long? Most people do one podcast and it comes out once a week. So once a month, you can do 5 podcast interviews on the same day, and your podcast is done for the month. And yet there you have it out there, and you can repurpose it. We've made blogs, we've made, LinkedIn articles, we've put it on our Huffington Post column, we put things on YouTube, we put it out on Twitter, we put it out on Facebook, we put it out on Instagram, all of these episodes. And so we're repurposing and getting it out there in many ways. And you can do that to leverage yourself and your brand. So that's the what do you want out of it? And you need to make those decisions up front. And the problem is most people don't make any of those decisions. And therefore, it's almost like the podcast is a random walk down Wall Street. There's a book on that where you could just buy any stock. But the truth is you can't. So if you want to be a rock star as a podcast, it really comes from having a strong foundation that you have thought through, what is this podcast all about? And where do I want to take it in terms of my brand, in terms of the money I'm making, in terms of the impact I'm making? And I think it all starts with impact. You've got to have a podcast that's making an impact that your particular market really wants and is looking for.
Wow. It's all about planning, having and execute that plan. So you already touched on money. Where is the money? What's the number one source of real money making with podcasts?
Yeah, thank you for coming back to that, Chris, because probably, when I'm at an event, I happen to be speaking at 2 events in the next 4 weeks that are podcast events. I'm at New Media Summit, and I have a breakout room with 100 people at PodFest. And the number one question people ask me, they go, well, JV, why should I start a podcast? Where's there any money in it? Well, there are a lot of things other than the money, including the influence, the brand, becoming recognized. But the money is really in the guests. building strong relationships with guests. I've had guests that became clients. I've had guests that have become sponsors. I've had guests that I've done affiliate relationships with. Every place that I'm speaking so far this year, the person was a guest on my podcast and invited me. And that was true last year as well. It all came from the guest inviting me. And then I get on their podcast, so that gets me more exposure. And we look at where could we do joint ventures together. So the real money is building deep relationships with the great guests that you have.
I agree. So besides what you already told us, like what's the main reason somebody should consider starting a podcast? Like, I'm guilty. I don't have a podcast. I do these video interviews. What's the main reason I should start a podcast?
Yeah, if you really want to get your name and your brand out there, you want to be a person of influence, you want to connect in a big way with your audience, the people that you really want in your community, the people you want buying from you, and you want to get known. Right now, podcasting is the hottest way to do it. And I think anybody who has, an inner urge, like I had a calling. I told my team, I said, this is going to be huge. And it was. I really wanted to be a podcaster, but I want to go back because I was on podcasts as a guest for a solid year before I became a podcaster. So I think that you need to be looking to do both, but there's nothing like being the host. And I got to tell you, just as a fun thing to do, it's the best gig in town. Like this week on Friday, I have 7 podcasts that I'm recording, 4-hour slot, an hour each time, an hour break, and then 3 hours. That's a typical podcast recording day for me because we have so many podcasts. And meeting people like yourself, Chris, it's the beginning of many business relationships, many business friendships that are possibly going to last a lifetime. There's just no better way. John Gray's been on my show, I think 8 times. Jack Canfield a couple of times. He was in Italy, in Florence, emailing me about what restaurant to go to, and I was telling him what restaurant I went to. I wouldn't have even known Jack Canfield otherwise, right? So there's so many people that I've met that I would have had no access to. And then here's the great thing. If you do a really good job with your podcast, I'd say at least half, if not more, of our podcast guests that are great guests come from a podcast guest, then connecting me to their peer group. So
right.
It's a way to really get massively connected. And then, of course, it's a great community. I would say, half of my business friends are podcasters. We all have podcasts and we share guests and we get together and have a good time.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we connected, right? Through somebody who interviewed me.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So why do some podcasters fail?
I think the biggest reason podcasters fail is that they haven't done a great job of setting up the podcast so that it's a quality podcast. Now, you've got to do massive marketing. We do massive marketing. So, you can't just put out one tweet and say, okay, we did the podcast. That's not going to work. So the marketing is one side of it. But all the marketing in the world is not going to make up for a quality podcast. So you've got to put the time in really creating, crafting it. It's a piece of art. Having that radio clock, when you showed up, we have an hour. We're only recording for 26 to 27 minutes because then we've got to put in different material in the front, the end, advertising. But we had 15, 20 minutes to talk to each other, to get to know each other, to build a rapport, to discuss what would be the topic that we went over, what angles, so that when we went to recording, we already had a good idea of what this was going to be about. And that's the difference between a great podcast and one that's just very, very average. I mean, there are obvious things like you've got to have a good microphone, you've got to have quality editing, you've got to have good music, it's got to turn out well. But it really starts with the product itself. You've got to have somebody help you build it correctly rather than you're just going out there and saying, well, it's just going to be trial and error, because you could spend a year floundering around when you could be doing it correctly, because it's got to be a great program for people to listen to, or you're not going to get listenership.
No doubt. And I'm looking at the clock. I know you have another podcast coming up. I still have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So how do you become a great podcast interviewer such as yourself?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I think it's part art and I think it's part science. But at the core of it is one quality that you can cultivate, because if you hear this and you go, I don't know if that's me, you can become that. And it's being curious about people. When I start my interview and the next person shows up, I'm really curious to get to know them. When I'm listening to them, answer a question, I'm listening for what's the nugget, what's the piece in that could become the next question. And I'm curious about what they're going to say because I don't know. We don't rehearse what I call the organic interview, which is the first half of my show. We only talk about what we're going to discuss, what's going to be the topic, right? Or if there's some points that the guests really want to get out. But being curious and listening are two of the strongest qualities that will make you a really great interviewer.
Yeah, no doubt. So you mentioned systems before. It's your number one secret. Why are systems so important if you want to become a rock star podcaster?
Yeah, they're critical, actually. And that's because there's so much going on. It really starts with the guest. You have to have a system for even finding the guests, for connecting with the guests, for giving them a link. We use Schedule Once. We have a very elaborate form in there that does ask a lot of questions. But then we generally, other than if they have a gift, the link to the gift, we don't need anything else from them. We've gotten everything. But then there are 3 reminders that go out to tell them they have the interview flow up front. The reason you need systems is so that you've got really a cookie cutter way of doing a great show. And if you think about all the shows that are on television of any type, they've got a cookie cutter way. When they start the production, someone's in charge of the lights, someone's in charge of the camera, somebody's in charge of marking where every actor needs to be, someone's written the script, someone's done the set. All of those are systems, and your podcast is no different. So when you do your podcast, you've got to have systems so that you've got a way that you do it. And each time you're going to do it exactly the same way. You're going to use exactly the same process. When we send out our marketing materials to our guests, we use exactly the same process so that they have everything. And everybody on our team, there are 3 of us that do all these podcasts. Everybody has the different things that they do, but they do them exactly the same day after day, week after week, and that's why it works.
Consistency. So we still just have a few minutes left. I still have 2 questions that I'd love to ask you. So you refer to podcasts as growth engines for your business. What do you mean by that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, all the main parts of your business need to be built, and your entire business needs to be built on a group of growth engines. So you need to be asking yourself, for example, a product can be a growth engine. But why are you building that product? Why are you selling that product at that price? If it isn't going to be a growth where you're going to go, I'm going to get a certain quantity of sales, you shouldn't have done it. So the same thing is true with your podcast. We go back to the original 3 questions: the impact, the money, and then what you want out of it, how it's going to help you advance yourself and your brand. So that should be growing in those 3 ways and growing your business. It should be bringing you audience, bringing you customers, guests that you can do business with, making you more greater notoriety out in the public so that you're literally growing your business, and it's an engine. And when you start looking at podcasting as, well, I want a growth engine to help me really build my business and get it out there, that's a completely different way of looking at podcasting than I just want to have a podcast and talk to some people. Because now it has a really specific business-oriented purpose that's going to help you grow and build your business.
All right. How can somebody get your 9-step podcast roadmap?
Yeah. So I have a podcast roadmap. It tells you in 9 steps. And to me, it's the most complete of anything that I've ever seen of how you really need to design, build, record, market, launch, and make money out of your podcast. And you can go to consciousmillionaire.com/podcast roadmap. So I'll give that to you again. It's consciousmillionaire.com/podcast roadmap. You can download it so that you've got the 9 steps for yourself. There's a way on that same page that you can sign up to have a 20-minute conversation with me. If you want to start a podcast, I can give you that as well. It's consciousmillionaire.com/talk with JV. Those are my initials, JV. So talk with JV. I'd love to discuss it because the world, if you feel like you have a message, I guarantee you the world needs to hear it. And there are people out there whose lives it will change, and customers that you don't currently have that will hear it and want to know more about you and want to do business with you.
Everybody has a message. So I think
Right.
everybody's a great fit for you, right?
I think everybody does have a message inside of them. You know, I don't think it's that you or I or anybody listening to this is special. I think we all come onto this planet with a purpose, and that purpose is to make a difference in other people's lives. I believe that's why we're all here. The sad thing is how many people never fulfill that purpose. And as a result, they don't have the fulfillment inside that they want. The world hasn't changed in the way they came to help make it change. And they haven't made the money that they're on the planet to make and receive in exchange for the value that they give out to the world.
Couldn't agree more. So I moved to the US from Switzerland, over 20 years ago. I mean, this is the land of opportunity. You know, with technology developing, we have the same language, same currency, etc. So I highly recommend anybody watching this interview, take advantage of this, this offer, speak with JV. JV, any last thoughts? This has been amazing. Any last tips for our audience today?
It's interesting. I'm on a TV show in a couple of days, and I just completed all the information for them. And they said, well, what would be the one quote? And I gave them a quote for myself. And that is that, we're living in perfect timing. And that may sound a little, well, wait a minute, what does that have to do with podcasting? Well, let's go back to our original conversation was, is this the right time for podcasting? I guarantee you, if you feel compelled that you want to get your message out there, and it seems exciting. I mean, you've got to be excited about talking to people, or this is going to be a pretty hard gig. I gotta say that. On the disc, I'll tell you I'm a 98 on the I. My joke about podcasters is that we're all I's. That's not entirely true. There are other types of disc people but a lot of us are I's. We like to talk to people. We really find it fun. When I go places and events, I like to find out about people. If you're that kind of person, this is a perfect fit, because you get to talk to some of the top people in the world just because you have a podcast. And some of those people are going to become personal friends, and you never would have met them otherwise. And some of them you're going to do business with and get invited to their stages if you do a great job interviewing them. So to me, the perfect timing is now. If you feel this calling inside that, yes, I want to be doing this, I'd love to help you.
Awesome. JV, I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome having you on my show. I look forward
so much
to staying in touch, and thanks again for sharing your expertise today.
Well, I come up to the kingdom, folks. That's a joke we have in Colorado and in Boulder. It's called the kingdom. I once didn't leave the kingdom for 6 months because people convinced me I shouldn't go to Denver. And I actually said, fine. So I just stayed in Boulder for 6 months without going anywhere but Boulder. It's a wonderful place. I love Denver. I think it's fabulous living in the Rockies and having, all that Denver has to offer from a big and then be able to go to Boulder, hang out with the coolest conscious people, that I know. And so it's just wonderful living here.
I love it here. Yeah.
Yeah.
JV, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. And, my best to everyone. I hope to hear from you, because if you've got a podcast in you, let's get it built right so it's really going to provide you what you want.
Let's do it. Thank you.